Hello, this is Patrick from the Fundamental Principle. So we've been recording for over 6 months. I want to thank everybody for this journey so far. We can keep doing this, and we appreciate everybody's support. It really is wonderful how many people listen, and it really is just humbling. I thank you everybody for listening. Thank you for everybody who supports the show or offers what they can. Please, any comments, questions, or concerns, reach out to Jerome on Telegram or email me. We're going to do Catholic and Identarian today. I'll start with a prayer, and we'll get to it. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Soul of Christ, sanctify us. Body of Christ, save us. Blood of Christ, inebriate us. Water of Christ, side, wash us. Passion of Christ, strengthen us. O good Jesus, hear us. Within thy wounds, hide us. Suffer us not to be separated from thee. No charity without truth. Devoid of truth turns into sentimentalism. Benedict the 16th reminds us, an empty shell that risks being arbitrarily filled by any false generosity. This perverted charity is first of all lazinesses, and abandonment yields to any claim because of a pathological fear of conflict. It's a illness of the demasculinized European man who can no longer say yes or no, who keeps quiet and doesn't get involved. It is the politics of the rat who plays dead, floating in the water. This has nothing to do with the authentic, authentic charity, which is active which is an active virtue. The implementation of a firm and unbending willingness, guided by truth, to exercise charity is an act of a good of another in a view of the common good, in defense of one's personal willingness. If peace is at stake, the Church has acted this way with people throughout all her history, wielding the carrot and the stick for the good of all, like a mother. The true freedom is guided by goodness. We poorly understand this is the way of seeing things because we have lost the true meaning of things, beginning with the notion of freedom, which has been completely perverted by modern selfishness. Authentic freedom, not the right to surrender oneself to one's desires in the name of moral relativism. Yeah, so it's there a big reason, like, I never was a communist or never could have been, like, I ran in anarchist libertarian circles for a little bit in my late teens, early 20s, and it's just like I couldn't get over the moral relativism, just the nihilistic attitude. At the point I'm just like, well, if you hate being white and you hate yourself, why don't you just kill yourself? And they'd always be like, they gasp in horror at such a concept. But I'm like, if your every waking moment is, like, if that's the only option, is like, hey, like, you can chase pleasures, or you could just end it. I don't know, it's probably cruel to say to people. I definitely not proud of it, but it's, that's a logical conclusion for any more relativist or any a nihilist. Is just, might as well just end your life. You have no purpose. You hate your skin. You hate your family. You just do drugs and cope, and you go to poetry slams. A lot of cringe, folks. A lot of cringe. But yeah. I don't know. You know what I mean? Anyways, quote, "My body, my choice," unquote. Imagine a motorist preferring to drive in the ravine because it's more exciting than staying on the road, or an illegal immigrant claiming the imaginary right to eat something other than pasta. That is actually happens in welcome centers in Italy, despite the influence of liberal thinking, which advocates for the freedom to do as we wish, as long as we do not infringe on our neighbors' freedoms. Our European societies continue to implicitly recognize the values higher than individual liberty. For example, people attempting suicide will find firefighters and policemen attempting to stop them from jumping off the roof of buildings because society is not a business transaction any more than it is a simple registration box for individual morals. It is a living body with a head to guide the whole towards the objective good. That is why the freedom of the illegal immigrant cannot be a right of greater importance than a nation's interest, or the nation too is compromised of human beings who have a right to life. A right is the worthless without security, that is to say, without borders. True freedom leads towards the good, which is in turn renders more freedom to the degree that is sought out. That is true for the people as well. We do create a good, which is the realization for our nature as desired by God. We are not created for diversity or any other unnatural ideology. Towards a just and effective immigration policy. With regards to refugees, we must totally rethink our policies. It is to be truly charitable. We must still have to reflect on what is truly good for them, and for that we need to know whom we are helping and demonstrate some discernment. One good way to go about this would be to identify on site the real needs of the refugee on case-by-case basis. That would be the work of our embassies in conjunction with the local communities in the way on a voluntary basis, but selective. We could take in some of a provisional basis. Pro-immigrant European governments and NGOs are doing the exact opposite. They allow the mass influx of fake refugees to be dumped into Europe and even encourage them to cross the Mediterranean while going to look for them in a few kilometers off the coast of Libya. This is not a rescue operation, but a meetup with traffickers and their cargo. This is all the truer as smugglers are in the habit of notifying a host country Coast Guard of their arrival. According to Tarek Sanbor, a Liberian Coast Guard colonel, ONGs pay smugglers to bring illegal immigrants into Europe, pay NGOs. Contrary to common misconceptions, this is not a case of immigrant supporters on one side and anti-immigrant parties on the other. Let us not be intimidated by unworthy moral blackmail, a blackmail that's quite successful, given that some of the photos meant to manipulate us, like the one showing fake refugees dead in the water, were simply acted scenes, as revealed by Monsignor Nathaniel, Metropolitan of the Greek Isle Kros and Nyros. Quote, I have seen with my own eyes foreign television reports giving €20 to people to pretend to look like they're drowning victims, unquote. Emotion cannot play any role in this discussion. I would really just remove women from politics, and that's a big part of it. I mean, even though, I do know some guys that are quite the emotional about their opinions and don't really understand that politics. I think really we can say that you can be but there's a lot of guys that don't understand politics as emotionless. I think that's something Pete Cunez really covers well, and Thomas 777 really covers well, is that the fact that politics can't be emotional, and if you're like talking about you're reacting with just your feelings, you're doing something wrong. A just and equitable policy is first and foremost a rational and reasonable policy. Everyone agrees to helping refugees who are in need of help. Everything hangs on the extremely important clause, who are in need of help. So the question is whether we should help refugees in danger of death, but rather whom should we help and how should we help them. However, keep in mind that this policy will only ever be a stopgap measure. To meaningfully stop the hemorrhage of the Middle East, we need to support a well-armed group who resist ISIS, and we must seal off our borders in order to stop the backdraft. The real divide in between those who have renounced any policy worthy of name, who are happy to sit by and watch events unfold, the party of cowardice, and those who want to effectively help persecuted Christians, the party of charity, but we can give no possible aid to the persecuted without first reclaiming our sovereignty, our freedom of agency at national and international levels, hence the need to have control over our borders. This is on the only way to be done with the migratory exodus. It's like, why would you help other people, or why would you try to, do these basic things if your own self is not clean? Fix yourself and fix other people. Pretty common sense. Towards a just and effective immigration policy. With regards to refugees, we must totally rethink our policies to be truly charitable. We have to reflect on what is truly good for them, and for that we need to know whom we're helping and demonstrate some discernment. I'm going to skip this. I'm talking about this. The return of identities. We're coming out of a historical cycle, seeing the 19th century, the foolishness of ideologies has set Europe and the world on fire. A lot of it, we're in such a new time, and I think America is very much stuck in the 20th century. I know that's not a hot take, but it's I think the hot take here is like there is no material solution to our issues. Like, it's a spiritual problem. Like, it doesn't matter the group, doesn't matter the active strategy. I do think the Anglo-Saxon is had their time in the sun. I don't know if it's going to come back. So, I think we're in the dying grasps of the Anglo-American Empire. Just like the Greek and Roman Empire, had its long time in the sun. And, Greece nor Italy never really had such glory again. I don't think we're going to see if we see an American Empire or American Golden Age, it'll be through a Catholic lens, and it'll be like, because the American is its own identity. The white Americans is its own identity, and cultural diasporas have kind of combined into one ethnic group. But I can continue here. One such ideological proposal, the infinite progress of humanity, the shining of the future, as they said in the USSR or in Mao's China, whether their custom-made explanation of the world, ideology plays the role of religious. No one can really believe in them, and each person aspires to find what is familiar with him, his roots, and his identity. We are living through the ruin of identities. Many signs attest to this. The theme of nostalgia in French film products of major historical events, the Turkish commemoration of the fall of Constantinople, the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in Beijing in 2008, the major success of Pays des Fous, the Idenitarian force of stateless nations, the nationalist victory in Corsica, and their religion elections of the Scottish referendum of independence in 2014, the rise of the Catalan separation, even the awakenings of religious feelings, Hindu fundamentalism in India, the progressive of Christians in China and elsewhere, the reaffirmation of Muslim faith, etc. I don't know. I'm not going to comment. In different countries, modernization does not necessarily mean westernization. Similarly, emerging powers have borrowed the technological process of Europeans. They use ideologies to realize their identity, glorifying their ancestral culture by opposing Western mores. The most grotesque example of this is ISIS making jihad with American M16s, inundating the internet with the Hollywood-like video clips. Sam Huntington addresses the issue in The Clash of Civilization, published in 1996, a work that is often criticized but seldom read. Quote, at the societal level, modernization strengthens the economic, military, and political power of society and encourages the population to assess its own cultural identity, unquote. But at the individual level, the bonds of traditional societies, social relationships break and lead to crisis of the identity. The price of the material power is therefore a certain moral and cultural uprooting, and inevitable backlash. We clearly see the demonstration of Idenitarian strength by the head of state do not ultimately reflect the cultural vitality of its people. This is especially true in China, where the forced modernization destroys rural communities. The background of Chinese identity. China lived out its industrial revolution, as did Europe in the 19th century, and in addition, the Asian despotism, effectiveness, and communism's legacy of repression, despite the rate of growth in the form of new missiles. There are 4 suicide attempts every minute in China, as psychoanalyst Hu Dayong explains, quote, in the psychiatric hospitals, we see a lot of psychiatric patients because the economic development which has resulted in a dissolution of paternal and family bonds and isolation of others, unquote. I do think there is a big issue with, like, we just need to touch grass, like that's incredibly real. There's gardening is one of the more relaxing hobbies that a person can have. I don't think it's necessarily a political action. Like homesteading shouldn't be considered like political activism, but it's, if you're like, hey, I mean, working with the soil or helping friends with a community garden, I think that's probably the best way one can really get in tune with the earth. Technological and modern of the rootedness can be comparable only with great difficulty. Culture is not generally modified organism. It does not grow in glass beaker in a laboratory. It is a wonderful world where the good health is measured by touchpad sales. Culture is no use. Our disposal singers relate more to CD hits than the polyphonic groups animating a village. Feast days thus entry the third world countries into industrial modernity means the death of popular identities. And it is precisely this destruction of rooted cultures in the name of economic profitability that is which calling forth the strong need for identity. The vital need for rootedness. We must reaffirm the philosopher Simon Weil when he said that rootedness is the most important and most misunderstood need for the human soul. Quote, unquote. In order to flourish, man needs to be at one with his environment. He must, quote, receive almost all of his moral, intellectual, and spiritual life through the intermarry of the environments to which he naturally belongs, unquote. However, quote, being derooted is precisely the destruction of these intermediary social and cultural environments, unquote. Hence a breakdown in meaning, manufactures unbalanced masses. The supermarket zombie always is in search for more. The homeland, the Petra in our ecosystem. The homeland is not a warrior deity, an idol. In the name of one must sacrifice justice and dignity of the weakness. Rather, they come from here, or else the homeland is a bridge between between God and man, a gateway between heaven and earth. The state therefore is obliged to preserve every place inside the territory or out. There's a large part of the population that draws life from the soul. The political responsibility derives from the principle of the universal destination of goods recognized by the church in its so-called doctrine is the natural right, and it is inherent to man, not a legal right, or the law can be suspended depending on how we feel. Every man has a right to a homeland, but the right of some is not a duty for others to be deposed or invaded. The universal destination of goods does not mean the compendium of social doctrine specifies that, quote, the same thing serves or belongs to each one or to all, unquote. This is why rules must allow for a fair and ordered exercise of creation, rules like those defined by the Australian government. Yeah, I don't know. I really have anything to say. I don't know if it's the Australian alternative and its European equivalent. In Europe, the abandonment of our borders has killed people, nearly 3,500 in 2014 and about 3,770 in 2015. According to the International Organization of Migration, there has been 2,000 deaths since 2000. There's been 22,000 deaths since 2000. In Australia, the government has adopted a completely different policy. The Operation Sovereign Borders, known for its unequivocal slogan, "No way you'll make Australia home." I think it's changed much since the publication of this book. Just loosely following what's going on in Australia, they keep getting flooded. But we can see what Langella has to say here. In a video message addressed to the political future legals, Lieutenant General Angus Campbell, quote, "If you're traveling by boat without a visa, you will not find settle in Australia. The rule applies to everyone, families with children, unaccompanied children. There is no exceptions," unquote. The Australian Navy received orders not too long ago. The Australian Navy received orders to no longer rescue smuggler boats, escort them back to their point of embarkation. The result, according to the government, the Independent Observer, there hasn't been a single death since 2013. As for the Mediterranean, the first step that a European state could take would be to send its navy to block the ports of Libya and Egypt and Turkey. Not a single smuggler, not a single merchant of innocent people should be able to use these countries as springboards for their murderous trafficking. France, a Fajori, if it is assisted by the European powers, largely already has the means to establish a blockade in the east of the Mediterranean. This would be a change. This would change our sailors, who regularly set on never-ending intelligence missions. This would calm down the slave mafias and considerably reduce the immigration, reduce the migratory flow by determining economic migrants from jumping in a fishing boat to Europe. It seems like he either misunderstands or is not informed of the idea of the open border policy is the purpose of it is for human trafficking and slave trade. That's why it exists. It's not the liberal take of, oh, these are just, I think the average person is told that these are just poor brown people and they need to live here because they suffer. But I think the elite circles, I think it's well understood that human trafficking and free slave labor is the whole point of open borders policies, or how active human trafficking is. Co-development is insufficient. Some people will say that we must help migrants stay at home, as if one thing prevents the other, but supporting economic development of these populations is not sufficient to curb their exodus. To argue, how many trillions of dollars has America dumped into Africa since this last 60 years, 70 years? Sure, you can argue that maybe that money wasn't managed well, or was it for liquidation, or was it for adding slush funds, or not used for illegal means or illegal purposes? I think that there's some truth to that, but I think if these people don't know how to farm, there's numerous instances of people trying to teach Africans how to farm, and they'll eat seeds, or they'll just do other silly things because they just don't get it. I don't think they're meant to get it. I don't think, and it's engaging with the God-given reality is what we must do. So we could just throw billions and trillions of dollars at people and it just not do anything, even if it was given by Christians. I think there is a lot more to ascending spiritually and that bringing everything else up than like material solutions. Cutting off their demon worship, their shamanism, their cannibalism, bringing them spiritually needs to happen first before anything meaningful else can happen. They argue to the aiding immigrant countries is one and only way to stop the hemorrhage. Is like telling a cancer patient that if he is sick, it's because he smoked too much. If he smoked too much, it's because his wife nagged him every day. So what's the point of treating him if we can just put a patch things up between him and his wife? By this logic, we ought to furnish all the rapists with prostitutes to deter them from committing rape under the pretext of dealing with the cause of the evil. It's obviously necessary approach. The purveyors of such a view ignore the consequences and shut their eyes to the suffering that they create. This is an atrophied vision of the world and an irresponsible way of speaking. The speech of weakness that is afraid of its own shadow. Perversion and enforcement go hand in hand, are the basis of any just and adequate policy, encouraging third world populations to stay at home by means of economic aid. Well, meaning, so yeah, I mean, you're just paying them off. You're not. Meanwhile, letting anyone enter France who wants to will have absolutely no effect on the migratory tsunami. The mass invasion will continue even more so as long as populations in Africa and the Middle East know that the borders of Europe are open. They will continue to rush here, and all the promises that we can make to them, like an economic boom in their own nations, which is a distant and is unlikely, will change nothing. There is an emergency. We must reinstitute the border and make them as tight as Hungary has. That requires men who are armed and trained to push back illegal immigrants by force. The coming sub-Saharan wave. As long as Hungary and the Australian examples are not followed in Europe, we will continue to see bodies wash up on our shores. We will continue to see bodies wash up on the shores of our conscience, carried by the waves of our hypocrisy. All the more because the migratory crisis has just begun. The growing population of black African is loaded with threats in Europe. The United Nations report from 2015 is very clear on the subject. With the highest population growth rate, African will be responsible for more than half of the world's population growth over the next 35 years. Oh, buddy. Oh, buddy. Mortality continues to decline in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, so I think that's changed since this book. I can't remember when this book was released. Okay, so the fertility rate has dropped since 2000. So from North Africa, the rapid decline from 6 children per woman to 3 children in 37 years. Which is, it's still devastating compared to Western countries. So 2.1 now. So yeah, it was in 2001. The study was done in, there's 3 children per woman in 2021, which is better compared to. So yeah, but I think global populations are declining. Thank you, Klaus Schwab. Declining non-white populations. It's a joke. Don't take that too serious. But I mean, it's we'll see. You know what I mean? So yeah, he probably wrote this in 19, 18, and then released it in 2020. So yeah, some things have changed since publication. Mortality continues to decline in sub-Saharan Africa, while birth rates considerably much higher than ours. In Niger, for example, a country twice the size of France, have an average of 7 children per woman, and that we just kind of debunk that. Whereas in France, there are 2 children per woman, fewer than 2 children per woman in the United Kingdom, and fewer than 1.5 in Spain, Italy, and Germany. In short, there is no adjustment in European policy. We haven't seen yet. All the fake refugees on the other side of the Mediterranean will be funneled into the breach. This is chaos that the European faces if nothing is done to stop the flow. The migrant flows, a global catastrophe. One must think that the migratory flows target only Europe, for the whole world is seeking frequent population movements according to the International Labour Organization, ILO. Immigrants represent 3% of the global population in 2013, some 57 million people, more than in 2000. 50% of the migratory flows between 2000 and 2013 occur in only poor countries from East Africa, not to be confused with Southern Africa, the Indian subcontinent heading towards the Persian Gulf countries, from West Africa heading towards South Africa, from China heading towards Central Asia, the Northern Latin American heading towards Argentina, from Haiti heading towards the Dominican Republic, etc. According to the ILO, 30% of the South Asian and Sub-Saharan African youth want to settle abroad. Since 2013, these figures have only climbed. Such a proportion of young people who represent the future of their country so seriously considering settling abroad shows that the magnitude of the disaster. Pope Paul VI was worried about this materialist temptation at the original of the migratory flows. Quote, "There are no riches but men," unquote, says Jean Bodin, great French political thinker of the 16th century. 4 countries hypothesized the dream of material prosperity are losing the richness, and more every day. Worse still, they are dependent on these migrants abroad who send money back home to their families. The very least we can do is say in which a solution cannot be encouraged, a spirit of initiative. Migrant flows destabilize the host countries, for example, Algeria, troubled by violent conflicts between China and Algerians. More than 30,000 Chinese have settled in Algeria in recent years. These migrant waves are not only a threat to peace in the long term, their waves of migrants could provoke an ecological catastrophe without precedent on global scale. Ecology, yes. The Chinese are extremely terrible ecologists. They don't care. They're destroying seascapes and fishing spots. They no care for other countries or the globe. By general uprooting, they impose the large international migrants. This does not count any physical impact on the land and will be allocated to these migrants. Quote, "The ecology also implies the preservation of cultural riches for humanity in the broadest sense." Unquote. Pope Francis and Laudato Si. The concern is to protect the planet from chemical pollution and legitimate CO2 in the atmosphere, oil spills, pesticides, etc. You have to keep in mind that all kinds of population, McDonald's, reality TV, immigrants, impossible to assimilate. All these things are not cultural and mental pollutions. The Holy Father goes even further. Quote, "The disappearance of a culture can be more than as serious than the disappearance of an animal species," unquote, and the imposition of a hegemonic style of life can be as determinal as the alteration of ecosystems. In the French suburbs, dominated by Islam and street culture. Hegemonic style of life is imposed upon the remaining Europeans who live there. At this stage, immigration is a toxic pollution, a holistic ecology promoted by Pope Francis and the heirs of the anti-gay marriage movement, Idenitarian, or it will cease to be. Against national egos and this great fight for rootedness, a purely Franco-centrist vision would be an error. We can see the limits of national egoism with a migrant back and forth, turn back here, welcomed here. The migrant crisis is a problem that has to be dealt with at the European level. Moreover, for some years, it has provoked absolutely irresponsible statements by several European populist leaders. In the early 2015, a Greek minister of the Interior threatened, quote, to flood Europe with migrants if Europe leaves us in full crisis, and so much better if among the migrants there are ISIS jihadists, unquote. These childish statements are coming from at a critical time in Greece's history, traumatized as the country is a serious budgetary cuts and on fast track to becoming a third world country. During the anti-Austriite protests, Angela Merkel, who was deemed responsible for the humiliation imposed on the Greeks by the European Union, was caricatured as a Nazi officer with a swastika and Hitler mustache. Anti-Germanism is attached to anti-liberalism. It is as an excess of silly and harmful language, maybe not. In 2012, facing the impasse in which Italy has placed by the absence of an agreement with her neighbors concerning the management of Libya and Tanzania, legal immigrants, Rome had issued an overwhelming number of visit permits to these immigrants. According to Lafargo, the France, groups of immigrants shout while leaving the camps. The sooner we, quote, the sooner we issue them these papers, the sooner they'll leave the country, unquote, said Matteo Salvini, a representative of Lega Nord, at the time the later Minister of the Interior. We have to empty the bath, declared Umberto Bossi, chief of Lega Nord, then Minister of the Reforms for Federalism. This sorry spectacle reminds us of the tragic events of European history when division among Christians allowed the Turks to get as far as Vienna and the Arabs to get as far as the Poiters. Of course, the European Commission plays an active role in the current invasion of our continent, but the European Union has a good alibi. Having no police, no army, it cannot impose anything on countries that haven't already accepted under the table agreements. The policy of misunderstood national interest who plays a role in the problem is at Lampedusa, Crete, and Malta, Spanish enclaves in Morocco, the scattered Greek isles that there are defending the border of Britain, France, and Germany. The common good of nationals strictly dependent on the safeguarding of European common good. European genius in the service to the world. In the face of the migrant flows, which destabilized the world and impoverished countries that immigrants are leaving, we must respond with a policy of rootedness. Europeans must be at the forefront of the movement chosen by Providence to spread the good news, the civilization across the world. Europe bears a destiny. This isn't about imperialist pride or desire for power. It's about assuming the talents we've received from heaven. For Greek democracy, to the Arian rocket series, passing through the genius of Roman law, the invention of electricity, the Carvel or modern medicine, Europe in the motor of the world. In fact, there is, not to downplay African and Asian successes, the Chinese invented gunpowder, the compass, and the magnet before us, the Europe, has still had the advantage over its neighbors. The biochemist Joseph Needham, a lover of China and a represent Maoist, attributed this advantage to Christianity. Belief in a, quote, heavenly creating divinity, supreme and rational, gave a series of laws to which materials, crystals, plants, animals, and the stars have submitted in their way, unquote. By the view, nature can be studied to discover its intimate order, whereas pantheism, the divine is everywhere, and animism, everything has its own soul, and closes man in fear and hampers his actions. If Christianity played a considerable role in this, European man owes his supremacy to instinct qualities, his tireless curiosity tied to a stubborn quest for universal, at least since the pre-Socrates, and reflected on beginning. European man, more than others, cannot be stopped from seeing what's on the other side of the mountain. This is his strength and his identity, his spirit of discovery. Let us remember Pythias of Massilia, the Greek geographer, who between the 4th and 3rd century before Christ reached the North Sea and the Baltic Sea from Marsella, possibly even Iceland. The Vikings, ferocious pagans, discovered America by landing in Vinland, some part of in Canada, 1,000 years ago, ordered to a good end and rooted in faith as strong as St. Paul's or Peter's, crossing half the known world to bring salvation to Europe. European advantage can serve the common good of the world as it should. This is the sense of the call of Compostela, derived in 1982, Pope John Paul II, quote, "O ancient Europe, you can still be a beacon of civilization as impetus for progress in the world. The other continents are watching you and waiting also for your response that St. James gave to Christ. I can," unquote. As a result of John Paul II, Pope Francis did not hesitate to defend the preeminence of Europe. Quote, "China has perhaps an older, deeper culture, but Europe alone has a vocation of university and of service," unquote. This statement by Pope Francis is very pertinent. It is true, Europe has the maturity and experience, most of the transformative inventions that she exports to the world were for her the fruit of a long process that also gave rise to beneficial counterfires. Thus, Protestant generates the Reformation, liberalism gave birth to socialism, and the wars between nation states launches the idea of a common Europe. However, intensive aggregation leads to consumers to consider a healthier diet. The regime of political parties creates the hope of a head of state who is above party politics, etc. There is a lot that could be said about certain safeguards that are occasionally complicit in the threat they aim to eliminate, like Marxism and European construction, but imperfect though they be, these counter results show the capacity for resilience in European societies. Europe is therefore better armed than the westernized elites of Asia or Africa countries, who, like the nouveau riches, throw themselves completely into modernity, whose magnitude they cannot measure because they did not create it. Europe, better than others, has its ability to return to herself. As Pope Francis said, the only continent that can bring a certain unity to the world is Europe. I mean, and that quote himself is kind of, I didn't really get that quote from him or that it really hasn't affected my worldview. That's just been like that mindset has been intrinsic to me. And I'm glad Pope Francis kind of affirmed and agreed. I wasn't aware that he said this, but it's, you can read Acts, and it talks about, I forget which apostle wanted to go to the Asian Minor, and the Holy Spirit said no. So, the whole idea of, like, God chose the worst people first to redeem, and they failed, and then his best creation second. His best creation second, to help spread his word, or his love for creation. I think it's very, very relevant through the scripture. But on the condition that, quote, she finds herself roots, unquote, a Europe is truly European will be the axis of the world towards a European policy of rootedness. Only a Confederate European response, respectful of national diversity, can be the end to a threat facing the old continent. The Visegrad Group, V4, can serve as an example. It brings together Poland and the Czech Republic, Slovak, and Hungary. I'm pretty sure V Group is a pro-Israeli op, but so I'm not sure where he's coming from. Created to prepare Central and European countries for entry into a false European of Brussels, V4 became a major political force itself on the border of the European Union in the process of decay, considering immigration as security. And the two biggest issues currently, the V4 intend to be the most secure region on the continent. This is why Visegrad, I think, so Visegrad and the V4 might be separate. The Visegrad Twitter account might be separate organizations. I'm not too familiar with Central Europe in my complete ignorance. This is why, having built a barrier on the southern border of Hungary, the V4 announced the establishment of the second line of defense on the Greek border. But as security also plays out in Africa and Asia, Europe needs to find her conquering and civilizing spirit again in the ports of Libya, Damascus, and Istanbul, in where we can best protect Europeans. This is what Dominique Venier was saying when he justified his role as the secret army organizer, OAS, to defend the southern border of Europe. We have to abandon this border. Migrants simply have to get across the water of the Mediterranean. But one does not defend the border on one's queen front. One does not defend the honor of one's queen in front of her bedroom door, but on the walls of her castle. This is why the Roman Empire first came about, to protect the city of Rome. This is also why it colonized North Africa, to make the sea free, which was being furrowed by Moorish pirates up until the 19th century. Their raids still affected Provence. At the time of Napoleon Bonaparte, Europe can connect with the audacity of Herman Cortes, the benevolent of Blessed Charles de Code, and the wisdom of Constantine, given their past colonial experiences and their imperial tradition. The nations of Europe, in particular those of West, the Carolingian kernel, must reinvent their roots wherever it is necessary. They must give back to men the taste of their homelands and a certain a concern for dignity of work, to prepare future cadres for service to their country. Europe cannot escape from her role as an educator. If she won't do it, the risk will fall to Washington, Beijing, or Islam empires of nihilism and excess. The great policy of the right to be rooted implies a 180-degree turn from our foreign policy. But more importantly, this will not happen without a return to the faith which made the unity and the greatness of Europe by the Church's role as an arbiter, the path of pilgrimage or princely marriages. Finally, the policy assumes the Idenitarian awakening of Europe, we must be aware of which unites us and our role in history. The great policy of the right is to be rooted, cannot take the unusual path of development, aid from foreign countries doomed to wind us up in the pockets of corrupt leaders. These foreign countries do not need foreign money. They need to learn how to fly with their own wings. But neither can be promoted to the right to be rooted. But neither can be promoted of the right to be rooted, be done in name of modern the version of development, which reduces the common good to an economic growth rate. Excessive materialistic concept of man has caused the abandonment of borders and the advent of society consumerism, which can be bought and sold. How can we believe the unbridled global capitalism, which has opened these countries and our countries to the four winds of wild globalism, could help raise them up today? The rate of growth and moral underdevelopment. To desire what is necessary is legitimate, and working to obtain it is a duty, Pope Paul VI said in 1967. But there are degrees of value that must be respected. Quote, to have more for peoples as well as for individuals is not the final purpose, unquote. Searching only for growth of the gross domestic product, quote, is an obstacle to being and opposes its true greatness, unquote. A nation only concerned with its material growth rapidly falls into greed. Quote, the most evident form of moral underdevelopment, unquote. Moral underdevelopment is inevitable in an economic system based on material growth, manipulated by politicians like a prostitute played with her necklace, and the word growth is poorly understood. Everyone wants to grow, but few really know what it means. Growth is a percentage of increase in gross domestic product, the measure of product of wealth divided between goods and services in a given period in a given country. For example, the use of a wheelchair or a maid involves an exchange of money, therefore the production of wealth, which is accounted for in the GDP. The problem is that application of a pesticide, the activity of an adulterous meeting site, or the publication of Nicholas Sargowski's latest book, also part of the GDP. Growth, therefore, is not positive in and of itself. It is all dependent on whether the activities contribute objectively to a common good or a purely parasitic operation, like those carried out by a tobacco lobby, a self-absorbed film director, or a semi-human gesticulation of Cyril Hanumana. Oh, okay, so he's a Cyril. I mean, looks a very, very Jewish-looking fella. Is a French radio and television presenter, writer, author, columnist, producer, singer, actor, comedian from the Tuscan region. In a pastoral condition of Gordum Espis, the church has given 3 criteria for judging. The, quote, the rule of human activity. 1, it serves the authentic good of humanity, that it conforms to the design and the will of God, and that it allows men as an individual or as a member of society to develop and realize his vocation in all its fullness, unquote. We're far from this at the point that we need to talk about our economic system hasn't become anti-Christian. And that will end us for today. We will pick up next time with towards a full human development. Any comments, questions, concerns, please email us. This chapter is very long. I think it's... So we'll take it slow. And I appreciate everybody who's been following along. Thank you.